Many Pokemon have been buffed en route to gaining viability, but far more have been passed over and left to linger uselessly. However, just because Pokemon in the latter category have not found competitive use does not mean that they have been totally ignored by Game Freak. In fact, there have been all sorts of buffs dished out to pokes you'll rarely see, if ever, in the form of new moves, abilities, even the occasional boost to their base stats, and sometimes the rare type change. However, just because Game Freak gave a buff doesn't mean that the buff, or buffs even, is or are sufficient for a Pokemon to find a significant boost to its viability. It's not about the buffs themselves being bad either. They'd be highly appreciated on better Pokemon. The point is more that, good as these buffs might be, they aren't enough for the Pokemon they are given to. Not every buff is on par with, say, Clefable gaining the Fairy type in Generation 6, or Dugtrio's plus 20 boost to its base attack in Generation 7. Thus, today we're going to be exploring the Pokemon whose buffs were not enough to help them, and offer some suggestions on what they would need in order to be viable. But first, get the buff that definitely helps us here at Fall Swipe, because this video is sponsored by Raycon. We've talked about Raycon on this channel before, and we stand by everything we said last time. I use my Raycons literally every day, from listening to audiobooks while I work or work out, or having hands-free phone calls so I don't have to hold the phone up to my head the whole time. If you missed out on it last time, then worry not, because there's never been a better time to get Raycon than right now. The most affordable, high-quality audio earbuds around. They've upgraded their latest model of everyday earbuds even further, which is crazy because the last one already had a ton of features I like. Now the new everyday earbuds have a quick charge function. 10 minutes of charging yields 90 minutes of battery. Now that's efficient. Another feature I like is the multi-point connectivity that allows you to pair two devices at once. This comes in handy because sometimes I like to watch things on a bigger screen than my phone. Now I don't have to turn my Bluetooth off on either of them to pair the other. It's all very convenient. I am not kidding when I tell you that I would not be able to make these videos or do most tasks without using my everyday earbuds, since I use various audio media to focus. So if you want the best affordable high quality earbuds and also support the channel to help us produce more content, go to buyraycon.com/FSG for 15% off your Raycon purchase and free shipping. Bibarel is a famously bad Pokemon. It's more well known for the sheer number of HMs it learns, which founded a spot on many an in-game team of Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. It just about never see battle, other than when it was to be sacrificed so you could revive something else. But it was essential for letting you strength and rock climb and waterfall your way through the game. Its competitive presence has always been utter nihil. Many players think Unaware was introduced in Generation 5, when Quagsire rode it to OU success, but the ability actually came around in Gen 4. It's just that it was given to Bibarel, who was utterly worthless at using it. Yep, that is Bibarel's legacy. However, some eyebrows were raised in Generation 7, because Bibarel got both Swords Dance and Aqua Jet. These were the big ones, but they even tossed in Liquidation, so that it hit slightly harder than with Waterfall. You're probably thinking, cool, why should I care? This is still the same Pokemon with the same appalling, pitiful stat spread. What difference are these moves going to make? Well, the promise lies in Bibarel's other excellent ability it had been too awful to use before. Simple, which doubles any stat changes received. Previously, any gimmicky attempts to use Bibarel, which were done just so you could say you used Bibarel, revolved around curse boosting +2 attack and defense in a turn, or with Bibarel as the receiver of a baton pass chain. While there was little more embarrassing than the idea of losing to a super boosted Bibarel, these were lip service gimmicks that even the most hardcore dumpster divers wouldn't dignify with use in anything halfway serious. However, Swords Dance held promise. Even for Bibarel's unimpressive attack stat, a +4 boost in a single turn was significant, and with Aqua Jet, this went hand in hand for a great new method of picking off the many Pokemon faster than it, far better than the previous Quick Attack. Plus, Bibarel had an interesting offensive stab combination, as Water Normal is great coverage. Fellow Physical Waters Gyarados and Feraligatr often use Waterfall and Return for the best 2-move coverage against as much as possible, so theoretically, Bibarel could become an SD user with sufficient power and coverage to break through slower, bulkier walls. Its speed wasn't that bad, and it has Aqua Jet helping it against faster Pokemon. Sure, nobody was expecting OU stardom, but at least something in a lower tier? Nope. Bibarel's stats are so abysmal that even its mega boosted Swords Dance can't muster any sort of genuine niche for it. While it's not dirt slow, it's still not nearly as fast as it needs to be, or at least not as fast as it needs to be while packing such appalling non-bulk. And even a +4 Aqua Jet isn't enough to burst through the million things that are going to outspeed it. Oh, and this is to say nothing of how difficult it is for it to get a boost in the first first place, given how hilariously non-threatening it is without an SD, and how threatened it is by everything. The solution to this? Well, the funny solution would be to upgrade Simple to triple boost, meaning Swords Dance would attain a +6 in a single turn, and see if that changes. However, more realistically, Bibarel just needs better stats, but it needs them in so many places that it just makes more sense to give it an evolution, or a mega evolution. Either way, take the concept of what Bibarel is now and make it actually feasible to use. Clefable and Granbull becoming full fairy type, Azumarill becoming water fairy type, Togekiss becoming fairy flying type, Mawile becoming steel fairy, Whimsicott becoming grass fairy, and Gardevoir and even Mr. Mime becoming psychic fairy in Gen 6 were major changes. Previously used Pokemon gaining updates that let them not just stay with the times, but in many cases, dominate them. Even Mr. Mime, the worst of those Pokemon, who eventually fell off, still had its time, as it was excellent in Gen 6 PU. However, there was another Pokemon that had the fairy type bestowed upon it in Gen 6 that never even had the chance to fall off because it never even got started, despite receiving one of the best types in the game, Wigglytuff. Yes, the fact that it didn't shed its normal typing held it back, as it meant it lacked the fighting resistance of pure fairy types, but Wigglytuff had so many issues that it's doubtful it would have been any better than untiered, even if it wasn't held back by being half normal. Wigglytuff's best traits are its Clefable-esque move pool, minus soft-boiled, but with an enormous HP stat, better so to pass wishes with. Thus, it seemed possible for Wigglytuff to take on the mantle of a lower tier Clefable, except it didn't, because Clefairy was much better at that, and Wigglytuff was downright terrible. Why? Its stats are just awful. Its defenses are truly abysmal, and while huge HP can make up for lower defenses, Wigglytuff's HP wasn't quite big enough, and its defenses were just too low, especially for a Pokemon whose entire purpose is taking hits. Contrast this with, say, Hariyama, whose HP is slightly higher, and its defense is markedly better, and this is a Pokemon that, while good at taking hits, also dishes them out in return. Wigglytuff does not have the bulk to set on its support move pool of tools like Knockoff and Heal Bell, and incidentally, this lower bulk throws a wrench in its survivability insofar that it constantly demands it uses Protect in order to receive its own wish, making it highly predictable and thus highly exploitable. It's not exactly threatening anything offensively either, as despite its nice coverage move pool, its special attacker is lackluster, and it is just so deathly slow. Basically, Wigglytuff isn't good into much of anything, despite some nifty resists. The solution to this is, well, getting rid of the normal typing is obvious, but Wigglytuff needs far more. A bump to its stats would be nice. You can take or leave the Mega or non-Mega evolution style, because simply buffing its defenses to say base 60 a la Hariyama would be more than fair. Additionally, a more reliable healing method would be nice. At least give it Moonlight. Finally, give it an ability it can actually use. We're not saying go all out Magic Guard, but Wigglytuff seems like a great candidate for Regenerator, which would further assist its hit-taking capabilities. But even with these changes, Wigglytuff would very much be a lower tier Pokemon, but at least it'd be a usable one. Here's a bit of a departure, so it's not just awful Pokemon after awful Pokemon. Here are two good Pokemon that couldn't keep up with the tide of the new, despite receiving one of the most incredible buffs they could have asked for. In previous generations, either of these Pokemon gaining Nasty Plot would have been downright riotous. In Gen 8, however, it was merely sufficient to garner them both UUBL status, which Alakazam had already garnered without Nasty Plot in Gen 7. Forget UU though, once upon a time, Nasty Plot Gengar and Alakazam would have been the bane of OU. Zam and Mega Zam are already among the scariest Pokemon in Gens 5 through 7, while Gengar was a meta-defining terror in Gen 4 and was quite dangerous in 5 and 6 as well. Now they don't even see use in OU. To go from OU stable to not even seeing use in OU despite this buff is outright stunning. Initially anyway, as it makes sense when you realize how the metagame has progressed. With the likes of Dragapult and Tapu Lele now present, Gengar and Alakazam can no longer go nigh unchallenged in their status as archetypical fast special attackers. It's not just that Pult and Lele are more potent offensively, or that Pult is a superb revenge killer for both of them, though both of those are very true and relevant. Also to be considered is how Gengar and Zam's frailty, previously not much of a hindrance given how badly they ripped everything in sight, now stands out greatly in a metagame where, in part thanks to a decreased hazard pressure from the proliferation of heavy-duty boots, they are no longer as able to instantly threaten just about all in sight, or at least not significantly enough to overcome their frailty. Pult and Lele are far from tanks, but they are far more capable hit takers than Gar and Zam, and this is on top of being offensive threats. We must take this moment to mourn the loss of Gengar's Levitate in this regard. It still would have had the same issues, but at least it could have been more of a punish for OU's ubiquitous grounds. But wait, you say, Gengar and Zam have Nasty Plot. They can threaten everything in the game lethally, easily on par with Poe and Lele, if not more. What gives? Well, Nasty Plot requires a turn to set up. And hilariously, we can compare this to the earlier example of Bibarel. Kind of anyway, with the point being that it is in fact they require a turn to set up, while being far too frail to consistently get it. They're more immediately threatening, of course, but then you loop back to the Pokemon where Paul and Lele are terrors without needing to set up at all. Oh, and even if you do set Zam and Gar up, you're probably getting revenge killed, if not by Dragapult, then by Tornadus Styrian or Weavile, unless you're brave enough to try and punish the use of Adamant Weavile, which is common at high level play. But again, this isn't really a risk worth taking when you could just use more consistent threats overall. Solution? Give Gengar Levitate back for starters. If it levitated once, it always could levitate, unless you're telling us that it got too tired in Gen 7 or something. However, the main thing you have to compete with is the immediacy of the Pult Lele threat, thanks to their far greater speed and power respectively. This is a tough one to fix, and really, the most practical way would be to give them Megas, which they already have, solving many of their speed issues, giving them a solid deal of extra power and even slightly increasing their hit-taking ability. If we're going this route though, we can also take Shadow Tag off of Mega Gengar, as that's too much of an overcorrection. We're trying to make it good, not broken. So instead we have it stick with Levitate. With the non-Mega route though, both Pokemon would benefit significantly from an increase in special attack, which might seem gratuitous but really isn't that much considering power creep. Look at something like Blacephalon for instance. A solid plus 10 to both base special attack stats ought to do the trick. And given Zam's IQ of 5,000, shouldn't it figure out how to make itself stronger over time anyway? Plenty of Pokemon have been given stat boosts over the generations, Clefable, Pelipper, Roserade, and benefited nicely from them, despite the boost not being too major. Most cases involve a boost of plus 10 or so. Masquerain is a case of the inverse. It holds the record for the highest total increase to its base stats, with both its special attack and speed increased by 20, for a total of 40. For comparison, Volbeat, Illumise, Chimecho, other similarly woeful Pokemon whom Game Freak took great pity on, also received a heftier total of base stats, but they maxed out at 30 across the board. Plus, it's not like this boost was given to something useless like Masquerain's attack stat. Boosting both special attack and speed was perfect for its role. However, even with this massive boost, Masquerain was still completely hapless competitively. Funnily enough, it was seen on 1 or 2 Sticky Web teams at a time in Gen 7 OU, and we really do mean 1 or 2 as literally as possible, but that was by virtue of Sticky Web, a move it had previously, with the special attack and speed not at all being the focal point, and it wound up being eclipsed in this role by Rabombi, which was incredibly niche itself. Beyond that, Masquerain failed to attain a meaningful enough niche to accrue sufficient usage even all the way down in PU, leaving it untiered, in spite of, again, the largest base stat boost in history. It might seem that given Masquerain's status as such a recipient, there's not much more you can do without, again, going into the realm of giving it an evolution, Mega or otherwise. But then you realize that's too easy and we don't want to go down that road again. So let's get creative. And B, Masquerain's stats were ridiculously low to begin with, especially for a Pokemon with such a considered design. It has Intimidate after all, so we can consider this more of a late correction. Let's begin by making it more feasible for it to use Intimidate. Yes, we know it's a bug flying type, so its weakness laden typing is going to prevent it from being an all-out wall. But let's give it the potential to actually get some use out of itself, as opposed to just being a sacrifice for a teammate to get a free turn out of against the Pokemon that KO'd Masquerain as it got Intimidate off. Let's let Masquerain intimidate opponents into giving it a free Quiver Dance, because that is what Masquerain's strengths are. A strong stab combination alongside one of the best boosting moves in the game. And it even has excellent coverage in Hydro Pump. Alongside this new theoretical Intimidate niche, this distinguishes it from competition like Vivillon. Rock or Fire types will be terrified of it, as well as ground types with rock coverage. So we're going to bump that base defense stat up by 15 points, up to 77. And we're going to bump its HP up to 7, so it's also base 77, because symmetry is awesome and it can be a symbol of hope. These are still far from stunning numbers overall, but they are now giving Masquerain the capability to do something, especially because the extra HP goes hand in hand with Quiver Dance's special defense boost. This basically enhances and makes real Masquerain's theoretical approach that its stats are currently too poor to pull off. Fine setup with Intimidate and or the Quiver Dance special defense boost, and after the boost, the non-intimidated physical attackers that switch in, which generally are less specially defensive, will get blown away by a boosted move, while the special defense boost or boost is or are intact for more specially bulky bulky special attackers. To really help Masquerain put opponents away though, we're going to pump its special attack just a little more, and we feel this is a far cry from excessive considering this is a literal bug flying type whose base stat total after all these modifications continues to resemble a PU Pokemon. We're not asking for much when we propose buffing Masquerain's special attack further by 8 for a total of base 108. We figured that since we've given it 22 points between defense and HP thus far, we can allow ourselves to go up to 30. This does mean that our theoretical Masquerain has gained a total of 70 base points since its inception, but this isn't even 3/4 of a Mega Evolution for a Pokemon that could still use a lot more. We were even tempted to give it the Mega Beedrill / Paradox Pokemon treatment, full on min-maxing and knocking down its base attack to pump its other stats further, but we won't, even though maybe we should have. It cannot be overemphasized how enormous hazards are and how enormous the niches caused by access to them become, even when the Pokemon themselves are not that impressive. In Gen 9, so many ground types got spikes, and the oversaturation of the move meant something like Deoxys Defense's access to the move was no longer nearly as impressive to the point where it currently sits in RU. Beforehand, however, Deoxys Defense was Uber 5 times because of spikes. It wasn't just Ubers either. Frostlass was banned from UU in Gens 4 and 5 solely because it stacked them too well, in addition to it not being just spikes. There's a reason Stealth Rock is the mandatory move. The playstyle of many hazard setters is reflective of how big the hazards are. The whole concept of suicide leads is by and large built around the existence and setting of hazards. Perhaps most famously, Stealth Rock is so powerful that players are willing to lose their Azelf to get Stealth Rock, most importantly. And just behind that in importance is the prevention of the opponent getting rocks themselves. Hazards are so powerful, even some of the scariest Pokemon around with access to them will slot them into their moveset. This is most easily apparent with Stealth Rock on offensive monsters like Garchomp and Heatran, or even the likes of Mega Metagross and Oras, but also seen how in Greninja, one of the purest offensive terrors ever, is regularly seen as a spiker, and even how something as unconscionably strong as Diggersby is an effective user of the move. Even beyond that, pre-spike saturation, non-Stealth Rock hazards were limited in their distribution, meaning even Pokemon that would have been decidedly subpar otherwise gained serious use, even becoming among the most spammed Pokemon in the game for their access to the move. Cloyster without spikes still would have been good in GSC, but in terms of usage, it'd be knocking on UU's door. Not the number 3 most Pokemon used in OU. Glalie gets used sometimes in Gen 3 OU because of spikes. Quillfish has use in Gen 4 Ubers because of spikes and toxic spikes. Incidentally, a similar dynamic applies to Rapid Spin, especially in the pre-defog days. Both sides of the hazard game are the entire reason Fortress exists pretty much. So with all that said, we arrive at the curious case of Heracross, blessed with spikes in Generation 8, and before you say heavy duty boots, remember that Hera itself is an excellent user of knockoff. Heracross had been doing quite well ever since it first entered UU in Generation 4. There, it thoroughly lacerated the metagame en route to a ban, then returned to the tier twice more in the subsequent 2 generations, excelling. Gen 7 saw it drop to RU for the first time, but it also got itself canned from that tier for destroying it entirely. As such, it was curious when it stayed in RU in Generation 8. After all, there was theoretically less power creep in the removal of Megas and Z-moves, and we shed a tier for Mega Heracross by the way, but this is about its base form, and the limited Pokedex. Plus, Heracross theoretically just got better because it was good old Hera. 3 amazing abilities, a great attack stat, 2 vicious stabs, superb supplementary coverage including one of the best moves in the game in knockoff, and now it was an entry hazard setter? Yeah, this was mystifying. It could even wield heavy duty boots itself to counteract the issue it had had for so long. The problem is that Spikes does nothing to fix another issue that Hera has had for a long time. Its awkward kind of bad defensive profile. It doesn't seem bad, it's got good bulk, especially on the special side, and even packs some neat resist in ground fighting and grass. The problem, it's also neutral or weak to a lot, so even many pokes that pack these moves and resist don't have issues slamming it with their coverage, especially because Heracross isn't that bulky, particularly for something that doesn't have any recovery at all, meaning even its resists don't get used too much. Plus, Heracross's speed is decent, but only that. Thus, getting Hera on the field in order to blast the opponent with attacks has long been a challenge contributing to its gradual fall, and that same issue applies to any potential spiking. Fortunately, this issue is too difficult to rectify. We're going to give Heracross a +5 increase to each of its HP defense and special defense, bringing them to 85, 80, and 100 respectively. This is a minor yet significant boost that increases its hit taking without going over the top. However, it doesn't do anything to fix the issue of Hera's awkward non-longevity. While we aren't going to do anything about its typing, what we can do is give it some sort of recovery. We're going to give it 2 actually, both of which fit with its design and lore perfectly. perfectly, Leech Life, and Strength Sap. It's kind of strange that it doesn't already have them in fact. This won't completely overhaul Heracross, but we'll give it a buff it needs. At the time of this video, it is PU in Gen 9. We'd love to see it acting as a unique, bulky, hard-hitting spike setter in its old stomping grounds again. And before we move on to our last Pokemon, we've got some honorable mentions to knock out first. In Generation 7, several lowly Pokemon were given some seriously nice buffs. Lunatone and Solrock gained 20 base HP, which is stellar, but were still unable to do anything meaningful. Meanwhile, Volbeat, Illumise, and Chimecho were almost Masquerain level in that they gained a total of 30 base stat points. Volbeat and Illumise got plus 20 to their defense and plus 10 to special defense, while Chimecho got plus 10 to each of its HP defense and special defense. However, given their innate flaws, very much including stats still far too low, they were unable to do anything either. Tyranitar gaining knockoff in literally any other generation would have been absolutely stratospheric in its impact, even before the move's buff allowing it to be used as a serious offensive attack in Gen 6. Simply being able to remove items for such an amazing Pokemon hitting the field so consistently would have been incredible, and forget ever switching a non-Sand Immune Leftovers Pokemon into it either. As it is now, bulky Suicune and Milotic can act as solid answers to several variants of T-Tar in Gen 3, but if they ate a knockoff, they'd be absolutely ruined. Not that Sand Immune Pokemon would exactly be thrilled either. Swampert would be horrified at that prospect. Even the specific category of Sand Immune Pokemon with recovery, like Hippowdon and Skarmory, wouldn't like it at all. Knockoff was just absolutely perfect. Why bother with coverage when this move is going to mess with literally everything switching into you? The only recourse would be Breloom or Gen 5 and onward Gliscor with their Toxic Orbs already activated, and T-Tar could famously mess those two up if they get too certain about switching into it. This wouldn't just be incredible in OU, but Ubers as well. And once again, Gen 6 comes around and Knockoff becomes a bona fide weapon in its own right. Well, it'd be downright insane, especially when used by Mega T-Tar. Gen 8 didn't have Mega Tar, but the Bantar that became one of the metagame's biggest threats would be obscenely ferocious in a metagame that lacked the knock-absorbing elements that were Z-Crystals and Megastones, and for that matter, Poison, Heal, Toxic Orb, Gliscor. So the fact that Tyranitar dropped to RU in Generation 9 is made especially mind-blowing, knowing it now has this tool that would completely flip the game on its head in literally any other gen. It's not difficult at all to conceive of T-Tar getting banned from OU outright. Even T-Tar eventually rising to UU doesn't change this. The fact is that despite receiving one of the most unbelievably monumental bluffs possible, like seriously, we cannot emphasize enough its absurdity, Gen 9 has so thoroughly suppressed T-Tar's traits that even this isn't enough for it. So what is there to be done? It seems outright bizarre to have to buff any aspect of T-Tar, considering it's, Tyranitar. But if it's going to keep up in the brave new world of Gen 9, it's going to need some new tricks. The issue is really that its typing has become quite awkward in this new tier, which threatens it at every corner, and a bit more to any of its stats isn't really going to make that much of a difference. Anything reasonable anyway. So our proposition is to make T-Tar more of an active threat. We're proposing it receive both Stone Axe and Ceaseless Edge so that it can fire off powerful attacks and provide hazard support in one fell swoop. It gets stab on both of these. Furthermore, we're proposing it gets Sucker Punch. Hey, if it gets knockoff, let's just go all in. Its speed is more and more disappointing, and this allows Tyranitar to keep up with faster threats, both making it scarier itself and providing its team with more utility against boosted monsters. It's not like these changes are fundamentally going to break it either. Strange as it may seem, it's still going to have to contend with Great Tusk and company. Beyond that, who knows, man? Maybe it's time T-Tar received a Lifetime Achievement Award or something, in the form of like +1 to each of its base stats. There are many other Pokemon that could fit in the category of this video, of course, so let us know what you think they are, and if you agree or disagree with our choices. One thing's for certain though, and that's the fact that Game Freak needs to be more discerning with their buffs. When you're trying to improve bad Pokemon, it's gonna take something closer to a complete overhaul than even the boost Masquerain received, which is massive in a vacuum, but not nearly enough for a Pokemon of its lowly stature. Maybe they should be more liberal with giving out evolutions or megas, since those are coming back too. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And thank you so much to our Platinum tier patrons. Thank you so much to Raven Daytona Ring, Sorazan Croxon, Stoneface Colin, Bingleton, Ray Ray, Daniel Isbeast, Glitcherton, Alex Sabo, Funky, Skylaria, and Chica Chihyo for their support of our videos. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.